So I was called a genius today by a friend of mine. What's that? A bozo. You call our young intern Andrew. He does not like the fact that I was called a genius because he said you are actually a bozo because I didn't shave today. Well, it's because I was a genius, Andrew. I was working with a friend of mine on creating a name for a new website that he put together, and he says, "Oh, you're a genius," and I guess I might have let it go to my head. But anyhow, welcome to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams, and today is the 14th of March, and boy, it sure feels good, doesn't it? It absolutely does, and I'm trying to find one thing here on the computer which is not functioning properly because while getting ready, I forgot that we have the Christmas countdown. So, how many shopping days are there left for Christmas? Let's find out. We're going to ChristmasClock.com to find out that there are 285 shopping days left until Christmas. So we're actually getting down there. That means we're no longer at 365, we're at 285. And what does that mean? That means we are finally into warm weather. So I'm hoping you're enjoying the 60-degree temperatures that we've been having here in Minnesota lately. Now, if you've been watching our show since we kicked off in November, and we hope you have, also, if you haven't, you can still access our archives at youtube.com/North Star Oasis, and don't forget to like us on Facebook, North Star Oasis, and follow us on Twitter at North Star Oasis. But if you've been following our long-term discussion, we've actually talked a lot about rail issues. And the kind of the running joke in the control booth is that this is, Jeff's railroad program. Well, no, it's more than that. But the fact is, there are a lot of rail issues going on right now. There are a lot of things that just keep popping up in the news cycle. And this week is no exception. ABC News had reported this past week that there was a train derailment, I believe, in North Carolina. But I want to have you take a quick look at this clip about rail safety.
And I'm Rita Nina with the top stories on this Tuesday, March 10th. New questions are being raised this morning about the safety of America's rail system. That's after yesterday's collision between the Amtrak train and a tractor trailer in North Carolina. The truck was stuck on the tracks. 55 passengers and crew were injured.
Our video is stuck.
Everybody, I'm TJ Holmes.
And I'm Rita Nina with the top stories on this Tuesday, March 10th. New questions are being raised this morning.
Well, it looks like we're having technical difficulty.
That's after yesterday's collision between the Amtrak train and a tractor trailer in North Carolina. The truck was stuck on the tracks. 55 passengers and crew were injured. The truck was being escorted by a state patrolman when the train plowed right into it.
Well, anyhow, it looks like we were having some technical difficulties, but you get the point of it. The point is we have a massive train derailment in North Carolina. Now, that involved Amtrak. Amtrak is the national passenger rail service. Amtrak is essentially government-owned or subsidized, heavy subsidized. But I'm really not here to, badmouth Amtrak simply because it is what it is. But the fact is, rail safety is a big issue right now. And let's take a look back as to what we had last week with the trains up in the, this is the derailment incident that occurred in Galena, Illinois. Let's go to the tape.
Who's that? Oh, somebody says that they'll be on organizations. It's going to end.
It's...
Be pulled away like the other one. The whole train is sitting there.
Really?
They didn't pull away like.
Well, you can see that, and we played that video last week, that a train derailment, especially involving Bakken oil cars, is really a big thing. I was actually driving on 494 yesterday across the Wakota Bridge, going from South St. Paul into Maplewood, and there, along the river bluffs, there was a long oil train, and I drove right over on 494, and believe it or not, I actually held my breath. I held my breath because, just my luck, after pointing out about rail safety for the last couple of months, it would not surprise me if that was the moment that an oil car in South St. Paul would have exploded. Thankfully, I was able to exhale as I made it safely to the other side, but that just shows that right here in our own community, and that's what I've been pointing out, is the trains are here. They crisscross where we live. Just reading from Yahoo News, BNSF Railway said the tanks, and this is the Galena, Illinois train, the train's tank cars were a newer model known as the 1232. It was designed during safety upgrades voluntarily adopted by the industry 4 years ago in hopes of keeping cars from rupturing during derailments. But 1232 standard cars have split open in 3 other accidents in the past year, including one in West Virginia last month. And if you were watching the show back then, we actually had covered that one from last month. That train was carrying 3 million gallons of North Dakota crude when it derailed, shooting fireballs into the sky, leaking oil into a waterway, and burning down a house. The home's owner was treated for smoke inhalation, and no one else was injured. In the accident in Illinois, 21 of the train's 105 cars derailed in an area where the Galena River meets the Mississippi. BNSF Railway said a resulting fire spread to 5 rail cars. Firefighters could only access the derailment site by a bike path. Now, we bring this up repeatedly because the point isn't necessarily that there's anything wrong with the railroads. Obviously, we know that there's some safety issues. That's what we've been pointing out. It goes back to U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, who was complaining about the Keystone XL pipeline. That we can't have the Keystone XL because we have all of this dirty, grimy, highly volatile, explosive Canadian oil or Bakken oil coming through the pipeline, and it's a health hazard. Without taking the moment to figure out how all of that oil, which she is describing properly, how all of that oil goes from where it's being drilled to the refineries, and that's being our nation's railways. And these are the railroad safety incidents that have occurred in the last few months since we've been discussing this. Yesterday, our governor, Mark Dayton, actually came out with a rail safety program. And we're going to let you hear exactly what the governor said at his press conference yesterday.
Senate update. To address rail safety concerns, the governor proposed a combination of bonding and assessing railroad companies to pay for safety measures and upgrades to some rail crossings. His plan consists of 75 rail safety improvements affecting most areas of the state, and Governor Dayton laid out his plan in a news conference on Friday.
My bills this time, and I appreciate the support of the legislators who are here and others who can't be here, but is going to focus on some major projects that require grade separations that are so significant that we're going to I'm going to propose putting a part of my bonding bill into those projects, particularly in Moorhead. Mayor Moorhead is here, and Wilmer. Mayor is here, Prairie Island, and Coon Rapids. Also, I'm proposing to assess the railroad companies, the 4 major companies, an annual assessment of $33 million based on their track mileage across the state to fund additional at-grade improvements. There's about $240 million of additional, these would be at-grade, not separating the grade, but at-grade improvements on railroad crossings. We've proposing an assessment of the 4 rail companies of $33 million a year, so over it would go into a special fund to be used solely for rail improvements, and that fund over the course of the next few years would be sufficient to make a big difference in the lives of a lot of Minnesotans. Also recommending modernizing the railroad property taxes to make them more consistent with how property tax is applied in other kinds of property and uses. It would generate about $21 million a year for the state, which again would go into this railroad improvement fund, and $45 million a year for local governments to help them with their additional costs from this additional traffic. And then finally, we'll be putting more emphasis on the training and the other outreach efforts that are already underway, which again, we can elaborate on shortly.
We really got a good handle and a good roadmap on what we need to do to improve the congestion issues and the safety issues that confront our communities every day. In the last 5 weeks, we've had 5 major derailments, some of those quite spectacular with explosions and the like, and a lot of pollution entering into our environment. The US DOT anticipates 10 major oil train derailments per year. We're definitely on track to meet that projection. We have a challenge in our own western suburbs with a new rail line, or a new connection rail line, introducing these kinds of congestion, emergency, and dangerous issues in communities that haven't experienced them before.
With all the oil trains coming through our communities now, there's a new age in railroad transportation and safety, and our local communities have a much smaller margin of error now, because it just takes one 30,000-gallon oil tanker to derail and explode, and you have a catastrophe. And so what we are doing with the governor's leadership is making sure that we get to 0 accidents on our crossings and our intersections, things that we can control as a state. And to also make sure that our public safety officials are well prepared, that emergency plans, evacuation plans are top notch. And so one of the things we do is increase the property tax on railroads. I think it's important, and I think it's right that our local residents in our communities who see these dangerous oil trains go by their homes and their schools every day should not have to pay for the railroad companies to improve the safety of their operations.
That press conference went on, but the key thing to take away, first of all, for Governor Dayton, I actually have to give him some kudos. I have to commend him a little bit for at least trying to take on something about the initiative, even though I don't think it was really a proper solution. Yes, rail safety is important, as we know. And yes, there was that train derailment. We've seen train derailments here. We know that there are issues. But just trying to alleviate choke points isn't necessarily far enough, where I really think the governor needs to be advocating more for Keystone XL. But of course, they don't want to do that. But now, what's the key to this particular thing is that, I'm going to read out of today's Star Tribune. The package also includes Marquardt, that's Representative Paul Marquardt, who you just heard speak, has not yet introduced bill to separately increase railroads' property taxes by assessing rail cars, trestles, and rail bridges. That would raise $45 million annually for municipal governments, but not necessarily for rail safety. So is this just another way of assuming funds into the general fund from a source? I think so. I think that the railroads would probably be more apt to agree to that, and I think even Republicans would be more apt to agree if it was set aside for the rail safety improvements. But no, this is just another raid to get tax money, another excuse to raise taxes. Railroads are not on board with Dayton's plan, the article continues. The BNSF Railway, the top oil hauler out of North Dakota with 1,584 miles of track in Minnesota, said it opposes the measure, which I don't disagree with them on. Quote, we believe the proposed changes are in direct violation of federal law because they single out railroads for discriminatory taxation, BNF spokeswoman Amy Macbeth said in an email. This is a matter that was already litigated between railroads and the state more than 20 years ago and resolved in favor of the rail industry. John Apitz, the Legislative Council of the Minnesota Regional Railroads Association, said railroads are making safety-related improvements. He says, unfortunately, the governor continues to propose a slew of new taxes on Minnesota's railroads that are punitive and unnecessarily in light of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are being deployed by railroads to improve the state's rail system. Again, this just comes down to where railroads are already putting money into rail safety, and I have to applaud them for that. I have to applaud Dayton for at least bringing out the concept of improving rail safety. But the bigger concern is the fact that none of these people are talking about what would really make the railroad safer, and that would be Keystone XL pipeline. Well, enough about today's railroad segment. We're going to move on to another thing that happened. We were actually going to show this last week, but we had other pressing matters, and that was something that happened earlier this month. The United States Navy Reserve turned 100 years old. The reserve was created in March of 1915, and there was a ceremony that was held up at, I think this is at the, I'm not even sure. Our producer, Dallas Pearson, he actually went there. I was working that day. So anyhow, I'm going to show you the tribute, the ceremony that went on with the Navy Reserve 100th anniversary.
Navy Operational Support Center, Minneapolis, arriving. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our ceremony celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Navy Reserve. I am Lieutenant Michael Sheehan, a Reserve Public Affairs Officer with U.S. Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia. And like NOSC Minneapolis helps the nearly 700 Navy Reservists in Minnesota maintain their administrative, physical, and medical readiness necessary to perform their missions. Ladies and gentlemen, Commanding Officer of NOSC Minneapolis, Captain Brent McMurray.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is still morning, right? Okay. Thank you for coming out today. I know old, cold man winter is reminding us we're still here in March, but we certainly feel the warm welcome of the Minnesota civilians and leadership as we celebrate the 100th centennial of the Navy Reserves. I'd like to take this opportunity to just publicly welcome a few of our special guests. From Governor Dayton and Governor Smith and Lieutenant Governor Smith's office, we have Ms. Blake. Thank you for being here today. It is it means a great deal to the Navy Reserve to know that the upper echelons of leadership here in Minnesota support the Navy Reserve that actively drills and trains right here in the Twin Cities area. And of course, today, Lieutenant Reinert, known as Senator Reinert in other circles, he is the perfect example of a citizen sailor. A teacher at UMD out of Duluth, represents the 7th District of Minnesota, his constituents, and he has been recently selected for promotion to Lieutenant Commander in the United States Navy Reserves. Today, he calls me sir. Tomorrow, I call him sir. It's kind of an ironic relationship that we have, but we make it work. And again, you're a perfect example on the citizen sailor. Thank you for your support, and I understand that the Capitol is celebrating the Veterans Day for tomorrow. I appreciate you telling the news in the halls and supporting the legislation that supports the millions of retired around the world and the 2 million that are in the United States. And of those, there's about 4,200 retired sailors in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area. So thank you. You here, having the Marine Corps represented, we also have individuals in Army uniforms. We truly are a joint service environment. We work together all around the world. I know your boots have been dusted by foreign soils, and we have fought alongside. And please pass along to General Nash my sincere thank you as well. And I fought in the theater of Bosnia along each other's shoulders. So Thank you very much for being here. Okay, I have a distinguished guest here as well, not up on the panel, but standing right in front of me, Mr. Richard Thill, and I also have the son and daughter of Russell Wood, Steve and Kathy. Thank you for being here today. Folks, you might not know it, but it bears telling. Mr. Thill and Russell Wood were shipmates. They were shipmates on the USS Ward, a destroyer in World War II in the Pacific. They were on patrol on December 7th, 1941, whereupon the crew entered and encountered a Japanese midget submarine that was attempting to enter restricted waters. Well, that crew fired upon that submarine, and they sunk it. And that very gun that they used is actually mounted just outside this building. So in fact, Mr. Thill and Russell Wood and their shipmates fired the first shots of World War II against the aggressing Japanese. There was a complement of 140 sailors, and 84 of them were Minnesotans. Thank you, sir, for being here. It's an honor to be in your presence. Well, the Navy Reserve is celebrating 100 years with great pride today. We were serving in 1775, and I know the math doesn't add up. 100 years ago today, our lawmakers codified the Navy Reserves. But since the Barbary pirates, right off the eastern seaboards, to activating the reservists in World War I, II, Korea, Vietnam, and the present day, we have been there and answered the call.
Not only the Army National Guard, but the Minnesota Naval Militia, it set the conditions for the formation of the U.S. Navy Reserve in 2015. And since that formation of the Navy Reserve a century ago, the contributions of countless sailors, Navy families, and naval veterans have left an indelible mark on our state and on our nation. Brave sailors of the Navy Reserve have fought and sacrificed in every war since World War I and II, Vietnam, Korea, the Cold War, the Gulf War, and Iraq and Afghanistan. You have fought and you have served with distinction. The heroic actions of sailors of the USS Ward are but one of many tales of Minnesota soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and Merchant Marines who have stepped forward to our state and nation. And to you, Mr. Thill, and to the family of Mr. Wood, you make me proud to be a Minnesotan. Everything that you and your shipmates have done makes us all very proud. And I thank you on behalf of the Minnesota National Guard, sir.
Thank you.
I can tell you all from my personal experience in my 2 tours in Iraq that Navy reservists, serving in ground combat roles, I might add, and I'm not sure anyone signed up for that, but ones that I served with in public affairs were among the most professional, competent, and well-respected members of my team. I would proudly go to war with any naval reservist, any day, anywhere. Happy birthday, Navy Reserve.
The Navy Reserve in Minnesota has a long and distinguished history of service, including sailors who have drilled and served aboard the U.S. Paducah in Duluth, and the history has exemplified by sailors from St. Paul who, serving aboard the U.S. Ward on December 7, 1941, and patrolling off the entrance to Pearl Harbor, used the No. 3 naval gun, now memorialized, on the Minnesota Capitol Mall to fire the first shot of World War II. And now, therefore, Mark Dayton, Governor of Minnesota, does hereby proclaim Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015, as Navy Reserve Day in the state of Minnesota, saluting the valuable contributions of the Navy Reserve sailors for the state of Minnesota. And sir, I would like today to present you with
We have, sir, proclamations from the city of Minneapolis, the city of Duluth, and also from the Minnesota House, and with Representative Detmer's help from the Minnesota House and from the Minnesota Senate. and sir, my intention is not to read all of these to you. I think folks have lunch plans. But I would invite Representative Detmer, who is the chair of the Veterans Committee in the Minnesota House, and I know that these issues that have been mentioned, especially those that revolve around citizen sailors and citizen soldiers, are near and dear to his heart. So I would invite Representative Detmer to say a few words, and if you want to share any of the House's proclamation, feel free to do so.
Well, thank you, Representative Reinhardt. And yeah, we had some great discussions in UCOM JAC, and JIPAC was also located there. And I'm retired after 25 years, CW4, Chief Warrant Officer 4, with the UCOM JAC, and that's where we met and had some great discussions. The people in UCOM JAC thought it was neat that we had both a Republican and a Democrat there, and we had some great discussions. And we both know that what we do is we want to make Minnesota the best place for veterans to stay here and to retire here. And that's some of the legislation that we're both working on, is to make Minnesota a very friendly place for veterans to stay here. But with that, again, I'm not going to repeat all the words in these resolutions. It gets to be quite lengthy. But let me just cover that. Whereas there's over 70,000 Navy Reserve sailors mobilized since September 2001 for support of global war and terrorism, the Navy Reserve of today is ready and trained and aligned with an integrated and active duty force. And whereas the mission of the Navy Reserve is to provide strategic depth and deliver operational capabilities.
Captain, again, we have a resolution that says much similar from the Minnesota Senate, and I will share that with you. And we also have proclamations from the city of Minneapolis and the city of Duluth, and I believe Mayor Coleman will share with you the one that he brings you from the city of St. Paul. And sir, with your leave, and to a point that you made earlier, I would just like to acknowledge my closest friend and shipmate from both Officer School and Intel School, Lieutenant Commander Select Chris Husky, who is currently serving in the Horn of Africa, fulfilling that citizen sailor mission that we've all been speaking about today. So, with pleasure, sir.
Thank you so much.
And despite being nearly 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean, the city of St. Paul has a very rich history of naval tradition, as we've seen here by Mr. Thill's presence and what we've discussed with the USS Wart's contributions. With our keynote speech this morning, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honorable Chris Coleman, Mayor of St. Paul.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, and a happy anniversary celebration to the Naval Reserve, and to all of you who are in uniform and have served our country. I want to extend my personal thank you. We are a long ways away from an ocean, but that has never stopped us from outkicking our coverage in terms of the commitment that the residents of the city of St. Paul have to not only serve in the armed forces of the United States, but also to support the men and women that make that choice. Colonel Olson knows well the story of the support that the people of the city of St. Paul have provided for all those that are in active duty and service on behalf of the United States of America right now, through an organization called Serving Our Troops, which has literally provided, we're probably up to tens of thousands of meals now.
85,000.
85,000 meals that we have provided for not only servicemen and women in active theaters, but also their families back here, and simulcasting those dinners so that there's some sense that the families can connect to their loved ones that are serving overseas. Now, whereas since our nation's founding, brave citizens have answered the call to service at sea in defense of our country. And whereas the state of Minnesota has 1,139 active serving Navy Reserve sailors and Marines operating out of the Navy Operational Support Center in Minneapolis, whereas for the last 100 years since the official establishment of the Navy Reserve sailors have participated in every conflict in which the United States has been engaged, and the Navy Reserve of today is ready, trained, aligned, and integrated with the active duty force. And whereas the mission of the Navy Reserve is to provide strategic depth and deliver operational capabilities to our Navy and Marine Corps team and joint forces in peace and in war. And whereas the distinguished history of service by Navy Reservists in Minnesota was highlighted by sailors from St. Paul, Minnesota, who, while serving aboard the USS Ward on December 7, 1941, and patrolling off the entrance to Pearl Harbor, used the No. 3 gun, now memorialized on the Minnesota Capitol lawn, to fire the first shots of World War II. And whereas our community is eternally grateful and thankful for the great men and women of the Navy Reserves who work hard to defend our nation, now therefore I, Christopher Coleman, Mayor of St. Paul, proclaim Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015, to be Centennial Commemoration of the Navy Reserve Day in the city of St. Paul. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Had a chance to meet up with Dick Thill, who was the person that you saw there from Pearl Harbor, and he, along with a lot of the other members of the USS Ward crew, were from St. Paul, and they were naval reservists who, in the summer of 1941, I think he said, might have been late 1940, were called to 1 year's service on active duty for the national defense of the United States. This is before World War II began, and of course that crew happened to have been at Pearl Harbor when the first Japanese sub came in, and then after that they had already fired upon the Japanese mini-sub, and then the aircraft came in and actually bombed Pearl Harbor. I had a chance to talk with Mr. Thill later on that evening. And the thing that was remarkable for me when we were having this discussion was how he was describing that they were out in the harbor entrance, and when they looked back to Pearl Harbor, all they could see was smoke. They couldn't even see what was going on. They saw the aircraft going overhead, and then everything else was black. That was quite an eye-opening experience for me, because I'd read about Pearl Harbor, but we look at it from the USS Arizona or the other vessels' perspectives, but you never think about looking at from the entrance of the harbor in, and that's the perspective that the USS Ward had. And so it was a great ceremony, and I just want to salute all of my friends, colleagues, comrades in arms who had been part of the Navy Reserve over the last 100 years. And just want to say, I guess, happy birthday to the Navy Reserve. Now, as we move on, we're going to take a look at another story that has happened in this last week, and that is, of course, the Hillary Clinton email scandal. I have said even last week that I do believe that a lot of this is the Obama administration throwing her under the bus. But we're going to take a look right now at how the former First Lady, former U.S. Senator, former Secretary of State had defended herself for her use of emails. I believe that this is a vast left-wing conspiracy.
I know there have been questions about my email, so I want to address that directly, and then I will take a few questions from you. There are 4 things I want the public to know. First, when I got to work as Secretary of State, I opted for convenience to use my personal email account, which was allowed by the State Department, because I thought it would be easier to carry just one device for my work and for my personal emails instead of 2. Looking back, it would have been better if I'd simply used a second email account and carried a second phone, but at the time, this didn't seem like an issue. Second, the vast majority of my work emails went to government employees at their government addresses, which meant they were captured and preserved immediately on the system at the State Department. Third, after I left office, the State Department asked former secretaries of state for our assistance in providing copies of work-related emails from our personal accounts. I responded right away and provided all my emails that could possibly be work-related, which totaled roughly 55,000 printed pages even though I knew that the State Department already had the vast majority of them. We went through a thorough process to identify all of my work-related emails and deliver them to the State Department. At the end, I chose not to keep my private, personal emails. Emails about planning Chelsea's wedding or my mother's funeral arrangements, condolence notes to friends, as well as yoga routines, family vacations, the other things you typically find in inboxes. No one wants their personal emails made public, and I think most people understand that and respect that privacy. Fourth, I took the unprecedented step of asking that the State Department make all my work-related emails public for everyone to see. I am very proud of the work that I and my colleagues and our public servants at the Department did during my 4 years as Secretary of State, and I look forward to people being able to see that for themselves. Again, looking back, it would have been better for me to use 2 separate phones and 2 email accounts. I thought using one device would be simpler, and obviously it hasn't worked out that way.
And we are having some technical difficulties today, so we thank you for hanging in with us. First of all, in looking at Secretary Clinton's press conference, I want to point out one thing before I actually get into the subject matter. It's her use of the English language. The word vast, it's late Middle English from the Latin vastus, which is void, immense, compared with waste. So it's a very great extent or quantity. It's immense. And she used that once before. And this is when she was still First Lady. And so for some reason, Hillary Clinton likes the word vast, but I think that's usually a telling tale, showing, I think that's a sure sign that she's not exactly telling us the truth whenever it comes down to her use of that word. Let's take a look from, I believe this is 1997. 1998.
The great story here for anybody willing to find it and write about it and explain it is this vast right-wing conspiracy that has been conspiring against my husband since the day he announced for president.
So there was a vast right-wing conspiracy. And now a vast majority of 55,000 printed pages of her emails. And it's a vast majority is what she had just said. You know, again, vast. It's immense. But when you look at her use of the English language, vast may actually tip us off a little bit more as to what her true meaning is. We know that there's a vast chance that she's not telling us the truth. We have seen this before. She's talking about the email server actually being in her Chappaquiddick house, protected by a Secret Service detail. And this kind of reminds me of the Rose Law Firm records that were discovered in a closet in the residence of the White House a few years after the Clintons had moved in. I think that that's probably by this time highly unbelievable. And I think a vast majority of Americans kind of also see the same thing. And I really do believe that this is a setup by the Democratic Party, by mainly the Obama operatives. They're saying we have an opportunity of ditching Hillary Clinton. I don't think Hillary was really ever well liked. I think she was respected, more so because of who her husband was. I had met both Hillary and Bill Clinton in my military career, and I have to say that whether you agree with his policies or not, Bill Clinton had a certain panache. He had a certain charm. And you can't help but liking Bill Clinton. You can't necessarily like his policies. You can't exactly like some of his personal conduct. But Bill was a nice guy. And he was like everybody's buddy. And I noticed that in the few moments that I was with him on 3 different occasions. But Hillary is a different story. She's an opportunist, she's shrewd, she's manipulative. Everybody knows that. This is nothing new. I'm not giving you any new revelation here. But I really think that now you're starting to see a changeover in the Democratic Party. The Democrats don't want Hillary as their nominee, and we're starting to see the crumbling of the foundation. On the other hand, we're also seeing that Republicans aren't exactly that well enthralled with Jeb Bush because the two previous presidential administrations were Bushes. And really what this country is trying to do is get beyond the Bushes and the Clintons. And I actually endorse that. I'd like to see anybody but Bush or Clinton for either party get the nomination. Obviously, I'm only one vote in that process, as are you, one vote in that process. But to go back to the genius remark, I was talking with a longtime DFL operative this last week about Hillary Clinton, and I was reminding him of some of the history that she had, Rose Law Firm billing records, her time as a Watergate prosecutor, and how she has not exactly been a person trustworthy enough to hold the office of the presidency of the United States. And this is a Democrat who supported her back in 2008. And he looked at me and he says, "You are a genius." Simply because I had never seen this before. You've got a long history here of knowing your stuff. And so I'll pat myself on the back here, but it's because, and he looked and he says, "You are pragmatic, and you're here to look at the truth, and you're here to give an honest assessment," and that's what I appreciate about you. And I got this from a long-term, high-ranking DFL operative. So I know I'm onto something here, and I think that, you at home, you're probably sitting there saying, "Yeah, you're right. Maybe it is time for this country to move on away from the Clintons and the Bushes." So let's take a look at what happened with David Letterman after this, because he had a really interesting take.
Earlier today, Hillary Clinton held a press conference to answer questions about the email account. And I guess the deal is the email account was not secure, so therefore state secrets were being passed around through www.pantsuit.com or whatever. Believe me, I don't know about this, and I don't really care about this either. It ain't my problem.
Ooh, nor mine.
Yeah. Anyway, she held a press conference today at the UN to talk all about her email difficulties. Surprises.
Ooh.
We sent a guy over there and said, if anything surprising happens, you come right back and tell us.
What happened?
Well, we got 10. There were 10 surprises.
10 surprises.
Top 10 surprises at the Hillary Clinton press conference. Here we go, number 10. Entered the building whistling "Hail to the Chief." Number 9. Scrolled through email on her iPad saying, "Can't show you that one. Nope, not that one." Number 8, different Hillary Clinton. I'll be darned. It was a different Hillary Clinton.
Surprise.
Number 7, between questions, took swigs of Kahlua. Number 6, halfway through the proceedings, sent a colleague out to buy melons. Why? Why would you do that? Number 5, answered all questions by saying, "I'm just here so I don't get fined." Number 4, blamed the whole thing on North Korean hackers. Number 3, misheard question about Benghazi as a question about Ben Gazzara. Ben Gazzara.
One of my favorite actors.
Number 2, waving wad of cash, said, "What'll it take to make this go away?" And the number 1 surprise at the Hillary Clinton press conference, at conclusion of press conference, asked everyone to delete her remarks.
Well, you're definitely in trouble if you're a Democrat and you lose even David Letterman. So let this be a signal that this is probably the beginning of the end. I honestly do not think that we're going to see Hillary Clinton as the Democrat nominee in 2016. From what I understand, the two people who are most talked about in Democrat circles are former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley and current U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. So I'm sure that if the era of ascendancy of Hillary crumbles, I expect to see a lot more Democrats jump into that race, just like we're seeing a lot of Republicans jump in with no heir apparent over there on that side of the aisle. And then let's take a look, speaking of presidential politics, what happened with the Benjamin Netanyahu speech was actually foretold back in 2008. And we're going to see if we can get this to play.
Senator Obama twice said in debates that he would sit down with Ahmadinejad, Chavez, and Raul Castro without precondition. Without precondition. Now here is Ahmadinejad, who is now in New York talking about the extermination of the state of Israel, of wiping Israel off the map. And we're going to sit down without precondition across the table to legitimize and give a propaganda platform to a person that is espousing the extermination of the state of Israel and therefore then giving them more credence in the world arena and therefore saying they've probably been doing the right thing because you will sit down across the table from them and that will legitimize their illegal behavior. The point is that throughout history, whether it be Ronald Reagan, who wouldn't sit down with Brezhnev and Andropov or Chernenko until Gorbachev was ready with glasnost and perestroika, or whether it be Nixon's trip to China, which was preceded by Henry Kissinger many times before he went. Look, I'll sit down with anybody, but there's got to be preconditions, and those preconditions would apply that we wouldn't legitimize with a face-to-face meeting a person like Ahmadinejad. Now, Senator Obama said without precondition.
Right. So let's talk about this. First of all, Ahmadinejad's not the most powerful person in Iran. So he may not be the right person to talk to. But I reserve the right, as President of the United States, to meet with anybody at a time and place of my choosing if I think it's going to keep America safe. And I'm glad that Senator McCain brought up the history, the bipartisan history, of us engaging in direct diplomacy. Senator McCain mentioned Henry Kissinger, who's one of his advisors, who, along with 5 recent secretaries of state, just said that we should meet with Iran, guess what, without precondition. This is one of your own advisors. Now, understand what this means without preconditions. It doesn't mean that you invite them over for tea one day. What it means is that we don't do what we've been doing, which is to say, until you agree to do exactly what we say, we won't have direct contacts with you.
Let's just pause it right here for just a second here, because there's an important difference that I want to point out, and that is what happened with Reagan and Gorbachev and what happened with Nixon and Kissinger, which is what Senator McCain had alluded to, was the fact that diplomacy happened, that we had people who were in our State Department who were actually talking with the other diplomats from the other countries. When Nixon went to China and opened up relations with the Chinese, that did not just happen with the head of the Chinese government and Nixon just sitting down and, as Obama said, having tea, and then just deciding to hash out an agreement. They actually spent a lot of time working out the fine-tuned details, so that way when the leaders, when Reagan and Gorbachev sat down, and McCain said that Gorbachev had opened it up with perestroika and glasnost. So that was when things were ready, and that's when the diplomats had a chance to do all of their work to the point where an agreement could be signed between the two leaders. That's when the leaders sat down. And Nixon and Kissinger, same thing. Nixon went over after a period of diplomacy that had been opened up by Kissinger and the State Department. And so what we're seeing here is with precondition, that's the meaning of what McCain is saying. He's saying that before you just decide to talk to them, let's make sure that there's an agreement hammered out before we just sit there and say, okay, now let's just, let's begin. And what I'm trying to say is let the diplomats do their work so the leaders can come out and finish the job by signing the agreements, whereas Obama's taking the point of we need to just talk to them. And so I'm the President of the United States, I can talk to them whenever I want, but McCain is saying that go back to using your diplomats and actually having an agreement before you go over there. And that's the difference between whether or not there's preconditions or not. Let's go back to the tape.
Do preparations, starting with low-level diplomatic talks. And it may not work because Iran is a rogue regime. But I will point out that I was called naive when I suggested that we need to look at exploring contacts with Iran. And you know what? President Bush recently sent a senior ambassador, Bill Burns, to participate in talks with the Europeans around the issue of nuclear weapons. Again, it may not work, but if it doesn't work, then we have strengthened our ability to form alliances to impose the tough sanctions that Senator McCain just mentioned. And when we haven't done it, as in North Korea, let me just take one more example. In North Korea, we cut off talks. They're a member of the Axis of Evil. We can't deal with them. And you know what happened? They quadrupled their nuclear capacity. They tested a nuke. They tested missiles. They pulled out of the non-proliferation agreement. And they sent nuclear secrets potentially to countries like Syria. When we re-engaged, because again, the Bush administration reversed course on this, then we have at least made some progress, although right now, because of the problems in North Korea, we are seeing it on shaky ground. And I just have to make this general point that the Bush administration, some of Senator McCain's own advisors, all think this is important. And Senator McCain appears resistant. He even said the other day that he would not meet potentially with the Prime Minister of Spain because he wasn't sure whether they were aligned with us. I mean, Spain is a NATO ally. If we can't meet with our friends, I don't know how we're going to lead the world in terms of dealing with critical issues like terrorism.
I'm not going to set the White House visitor schedule before I'm President of the United States. I don't even have a seal yet. Look, Dr. Kissinger did not say that he would approve of face-to-face meetings between the President of the United States and the President Ahmadinejad. He did not say that. Of course not. He said that there could be secretary-level and lower-level meetings. I've always encouraged them. The Iranians have met with Ambassador Crocker in Baghdad. What Senator Obama doesn't seem to understand, that if without precondition you sit down across the table from someone who has called Israel a stinking corpse and wants to destroy that country and wipe it off the map, you legitimize those comments. This is dangerous. It isn't just naive, it's dangerous. And so we just have a fundamental difference of opinion. As far as North Korea is concerned, our Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, went to North Korea. By the way, North Korea, most repressive and brutal regime probably on earth. The average South Korean is 3 inches taller than the average North Korean, a huge gulag. We don't know what the status of the dear leader's health is today, but we know this, that the North Koreans have broken every agreement that they've entered into. And we ought to go back to a little bit of Ronald Reagan's trust but verify, and certainly not sit down across the table from without precondition, as Senator Obama said he did twice. I mean, it's just dangerous.
Look, I mean, Senator McCain keeps on using this example that suddenly the president would just meet with somebody without doing any preparation, without having low-level talks. Nobody's been talking about that. And Senator McCain knows it. There's a mischaracterization of my position. When we talk about preconditions, and Henry Kissinger did say we should have contacts without preconditions, the idea is that we do not expect to solve every problem before we initiate talks. And the Bush administration has come to recognize that it hasn't worked. This notion that we are simply silent when it comes to our enemies, and the notion that we would sit with Ahmadinejad and not say anything while he's spewing his nonsense and his vile comments is ridiculous. Nobody's even talking about that.
So let me get this right. We sit down with Ahmadinejad and he says, we're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and we say, no, you're not? Oh, please. By the way, my friend Dr. Kissinger, who's been my friend for 35 years, would be interested to hear this conversation and Senator Obama's depiction of his positions on the issue. I've known him for 35 years, and I guarantee you he would not say that presidential top level. Of
Nobody's
course
talking
he
about that.
encourages, and other people encourage contacts and negotiations and all other things. We do that all the time. We're going to go to a new lead. Senator Obama is parsing words when he...
Well, that was 6 years ago. Where are we sitting at today? We're sitting here with the talk about Iran annihilating Israel. We're talking about whether or not to have discussions with them or not. Nothing has changed in 6 years regarding our policies towards Iran, with the exception of the fact that it sounds like, and I just heard a little piecemeal on this, that the First Lady, Michelle Obama, may have actually done a little bit of low-level politicking of her own, enough to have some recognition of some form of Iranian something. I don't know if it was a dinner or a holiday or what. So I still have no clue as to what's going on right now as far as whether or not there are preconditions or not and what's going on in Iran. But that's kind of the next topic that we're going to start getting into as I actually start assessing the information. We're going to show you one last clip from Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary of State, regarding that last clip on preconditions.
Mentioned Henry Kissinger, who's one of his advisors, who along with 5 recent secretaries of state just said that we should meet with Iran, guess what, without precondition. This is one of your own advisors.
Dr. Kissinger did not say that he would approve of face-to-face meetings between the President of the United States and the President Ahmadinejad. He did not say that.
The candidates sparring last night over whether a United States president should sit down without preconditions with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It is something that Barack Obama wants to do, and something McCain says is not only naive, it's downright dangerous. Each man claiming that Kissinger supports his position. So what's the truth? Well, joining me now on the phone is former Secretary of State to Presidents Nixon and Ford, Dr. Henry Kissinger. Mr. Secretary, good evening to you.
Nice to talk to you.
Nice to have you here. All right, so what is the truth? Do you support the notion of an American president sitting down with Ahmadinejad without preconditions?
No, I don't. I have argued that at some point negotiations with Iran are important, but it is my view that they should be on the working level, and that the president should not be involved until we know that we are close to an agreement, or that we know what the nature of the agreement is.
So in other words, you favor negotiations at the lower level, perhaps all the way up to the Secretary of State, but you do not believe an American president should sit down without preconditions, as Barack Obama says he would like to do.
That is correct.
What is the danger in having a president do that?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that if Iran acquires nuclear weapons, that will be a dramatic change in the situation in the most explosive region of the world today, in the Middle East. It will give Iran a capability to protect jihadism with the threat of nuclear weapons, and it will demonstrate that the opinion of the United Nations Security Council, which asked Iran.
Well, we've heard enough about preconditions or not. Essentially, here's my take on everything in the last few seconds that we have. John McCain, Barack Obama, Henry Kissinger, they're all in agreement. Have low-level discussions, and then eventually come to the agreement and sign an agreement. And then 6 years later, nothing's changed. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Williams, host of North Star Oasis. We will see you next week.